if you were to say, I'm Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch, and I have an ear for, what do you have an ear for?
In terms of music?
In terms of anything, like whether it's politics or whether it's hobbies, whether it's, what is your thing? What is that Suzanne Crouch thing?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, I love being able to help people. I mean, that's really, I think, why I do what I do. Age is a great liberator, and you realize that time is very short, and it's what we do for other people. That becomes our legacy. That's how we judge our worth, in my opinion, is what we do for other people, how we improve their lives. And I always say, you can't change the world, but you can change the world for the people whose lives you touch. And we all touch people's lives in ways that sometimes we know about and sometimes we don't. But when it comes to personally, what I really enjoy doing is yoga. When I am home on the weekends, I try to do yoga. And if I can, I do an hour on Saturday, which I don't seem to have time for anymore, but I do 2 hours on Sunday. And I just love yoga, love the just being able to be in tune with your body. It like connects your mind to your body, and you don't think about other things. You're just thinking about what you're doing, and it keeps you flexible, and it helps
We're
you
talking about more than just like camel or child's pose.
Dogward facing down.
Right? Down facing dog.
Downward facing dog.
And all that. We're talking, well, you're like, are you like
Now,
deep in?
I'm in the back row, let me say that, but I keep up, and I'm the oldest one in the class, but I mean, I keep up, and I think I do a pretty good job. And it's just, it's how you keep yourself kind of, for me, that's how I keep myself physically active and physically in shape, is to be able to do the yoga.
Is it grounded or is it
Just grounding? It's very grounding. There's a lot of strength involved, a lot of stamina. You don't think about it that way, but I mean, when you have to hold the poses and they have to be a certain way, it takes strength and stamina. But it also is about the flexibility. I love to do the deep stretch yoga where you do poses and hold them for 5 minutes, and they're really about stretching your body out, because as we get older, our body tends to want to, kind of draw within itself.
Okay. We've been sitting here for all of 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that is the third time, and you did it once even before we came to camera. You talked about age. You somebody who concentrates on age?
No, I don't concentrate on age, but I'm very aware of time. And while we never know how much time we have, we know that as we get older, if we're lucky and live long enough, and my mother lived to be 92, that time becomes very precious. I think we take time for granted when we're younger. And when you get older, you realize that it's very finite, and it's what we do for other people and how we use that time. I have a hard time relaxing, and just kind of doing nothing because I don't want to waste time. So even when I'm sitting at home in Evansville with my husband and we're watching TV, I'm doing something. I'm reading something, I'm doing thank you notes, maybe I get up and do a little chore around the house, because the time becomes precious.
Is it? I didn't think I'd get existential with you, but I go where the conversation takes us. Isn't the time with family, the time with friends, isn't that the thing? Being involved and present in that, doesn't that in and of itself does that for you provide a value?
Well, of course, when I'm home in Evansville, and now I live up here during the week. I have an apartment, and then my husband's at our home in Evansville, and then I go home on the weekends. Now, don't feel sorry for him. He kind of likes the arrangement.
Hey, to each their own.
Because I'm not there during the week to tell him what to do and how to do it. So, he gets his freedom and gets to golf. But I'll tell you, he's wonderful. He does the cooking, he does cleaning, he does shopping. He takes back my Amazon returns. He does his own laundry. And so I told him, I said, after all these years of marriage, it's wonderful to have a wife at home.
Lord.
And now when I told him that,
I want to know how many people were ready for that joke from Suzanne Crouch right there.
But when I told him that, he looked at me and he said, well, I know I never had one.
Well, so, I'm not built for having a conversation regarding the sexes and because my My rational point of view is if you lead a traditional life, that's fine. And if you don't lead a traditional life, that's also fine. I have no interest in people who knock and abuse the idea of the traditional family unit. We can admit and we can agree that there's a value there. We can see this historically. We can see this economically. We can see this with children. You didn't. You didn't, and you have mentioned this more than once. I've seen you mention this on the trail that you're here and your husband is there. It is a unique relationship, but you have the question that people would ask is the idea of, can you have it all? Can you do it all? There are sacrifices. What to you were the sacrifices, and were they worth it?
The sacrifices are I am away from him. He is my best friend. He has the best political instincts of anyone I know. I mean, I call him and I talk to him every single night. And then I ask him about, you know, decisions that I'm thinking about making or issues that I'm thinking about dealing with. So, knowing that our time is finite also, makes me appreciate and treasure that time that we have together more. But I look at things this way, Tony. God puts us in places, and God puts people in our lives for reasons. And it's not by accident that people are in my life. And so I understand that at the end of the day, it's what I'm able to do for other people. And being able to make that sacrifice of being away from my husband, to be able to help people and to impact policy where people really benefit and Hoosiers realize more opportunities, but our state actually benefits. It's a great honor. And so the sacrifices certainly are there, but the ability to be able to make a difference in people's lives is what really makes those sacrifices worthwhile. And my husband would agree with that also.
You said something about the idea of helping people and impacting people and time. In Indiana right now, we're dealing with FSSA, and what we learned was a $1 billion shortfall to that family social services. And you talked about dedication to family and sacrifice. Well, there are family members who have been the caretakers to a family member who has some issue, developmental or what have you. And instead of hiring somebody in, they're the caretaker. And the way the state of Indiana has done it is that you can be paid for that. If someone's going to be the caretaker, it might as well be a family member. Then we learned of this $1 billion shortfall, which is not in actual dollars, it's in budgeting. We should be clear. There's a difference there with a bit of distinction. And now we hear that, well, we can make up $300 million of that shortfall by changing the way these families are paid. And they're having grave concerns about this, that they might not be able to afford to stay home and take care of this family member. Now, agree or disagree with that position is separate. How do you get to $1 billion shortfall? And if you're the governor, not the lieutenant governor, the governor, how do you fix this?
Well, it's what I have been saying all along. We have a plan to modernize state government, to take our 100 boards, agencies, and commissions and get them down to a more manageable amount. One of the examples that I like to use is education. We have 5 agencies dealing with some form of education and workforce training. We can put them all in one agency where we have a seamless cradle-to-career education system that prepares every child for that next step upon graduation, whether it's enlistment, employment, enrollment, or apprenticeship. What we have today is 5 separate agencies, all with their own software system, all with their own kind of agendas, and our children are not benefiting from that. So when I talk about modernizing state government, FSSA would be a part of that modernization. But I also have said and have called for, in the instance of FSSA, for an outside independent audit of that agency. And I would do that as governor of all of the major agencies. We look at downsizing. We look at bringing in outside audit firms and auditing those agencies, because I will tell you, rather than do what is easy, which is easy not for the families, but easy for the fiscal people, which is let's just cut the services, let's look at that agency and see where we can realize savings and efficiencies, because they're there to be had. And so to be able, first of all, what I have asked is And I've asked for that independent audit of FSSA, but I've said, how do you make $1 billion mistake and there be no consequences? If it was your radio company, if it was any private sector company, heads would roll. $1 billion mistake. And yet nothing other than let's look at how we can take money away from these parents who are caring for their severely disabled, medically complex children. And I met with many of those parents and many of those children. We're not talking about children that can go outside and play, come in and watch TV and you feed a couple times a day. These are children that have tracheotomies, that have feed tubes, that are on ventilators, that need 24/7 care. And as you mentioned, who better to care for them than the parents? Because last time I checked, there's a real shortage of pediatric nurses. There's a real shortage of healthcare workers. Who are we going to get to bring in and take care of these children?
So as I understand, do you oppose this change of funding in how these family members would get paid?
I believe that there's a better way to do it. And I'll tell you this, there have been so many unanswered questions that we have put forth, that I have put forth, that FSSA has not provided definitive answers to. So how can you expect families to make that kind of a change and to plan by July 1 for their lives to change and their families' lives to change without the answers being given? So I think we have to be very cognizant and aware of our costs. But I think if we would have outside agencies and outside firms come in and audit our major agencies, we're going to find a lot of efficiencies that can be realized and a lot of cost savings.
You talk about these agencies, 5 agencies with education. You talk about 100 agencies. Overall, you're not dancing around. That's not the right terminology. But what you're hinting to is that the size of government in the state of Indiana is too big. In a crouch administration, never mind just audits and looking at things, what gets slashed?
Well, we will know that, first of all, when we downsize our agencies and take them down to a more manageable number. Maybe it's 35, maybe it's 37. But when we take our agencies and get them to a more manageable amount, first of all, we're going to realize savings because we aren't going to have administrators for this agency, costs for the administrators for this agency, and costs for the administrators of that agency. So we're going to realize cost savings, but we're also going to realize efficiencies within government. So we have to be smart about how we look at government. And unless you have a governor who understands how government works, who understands what it needs to take for it to work better, and is who bold enough to take the steps to make that happen, it doesn't get done, Tony, because where's the competition? Who's competing with government? You have got to have a governor who understands it, understands how it's going to work, and then, equally important, has the relationships in the General Assembly to do those bold things. I'm a former state representative for 8 years. I just finished my 8th year as president of the Senate. You've got to have those relationships to be able to get bold things done. It's why I have said we're going to eliminate the income tax. We're going to axe the tax. That's a bold idea. Governors before me have considered it, but no one has taken the step to do it because it is a bold idea.
Well, you brought it up, and for the record, as I've stated on radio, I believe in getting rid of the income tax. The argument is, how does such a thing get replaced? Now, I have my answer for that, but this comes up constantly, that if you're going to get rid of an income tax, you're going to have to answer the question of, if these services are important to Hoosiers and they have to get paid for, how do they get paid for? So axe the tax is a nice slogan. How does it work?
Well, first of all, I'm talking about a tax cut, okay? I'm talking about a tax cut.
You're not talking about getting rid of the income tax.
Replacement. I'm talking about a tax cut, getting rid of the income tax.
You are talking about getting rid of the income tax.
I'm talking about getting rid of the income tax, but it is going to be phased in. It's not going to happen overnight. That's what everybody wants to focus on. Oh, we can't do it. Can't never got anything done. And quite honestly, Tony, we're already doing it. I mean, a couple of years ago, we were at 3.4%. Today, we're at 3.1%. In 2027, we're dropping to 2.9%. So we're doing it. I'm just saying, let's do it quicker. And here's how we do it. Okay? So my last year in the General Assembly was 2013. We passed a $30 billion budget. All right. In 2023, we passed a $44.5 billion budget. We increased government spending by 50% over the past decade. But from the 21 to the 23 budget session, we increased government spending by 19%. I'm not talking federal money, I'm talking state revenues.
Okay.
So before we passed the budget in 2023, we had a $6 billion surplus. Okay. So we said, we're going to hold $2.9 billion back as our surplus. The other $3.1 billion we're going to put into government spending, which we did. Now, not all bad. We paid down on debt, we paid down on pensions, we paid cash for capital projects. But the point is, if getting rid of the income tax is a priority, we could have put some or all of that towards that, and we'd be getting there a lot quicker. Because here's the thing. I travel this state, and Hoosiers, today they're being crushed by the high cost of living, inflation, and Bidenomics. It costs you $11,400 more today than it did 3 years ago just to meet basic household needs. So Hoosiers are hurting, and we have an opportunity for the average Hoosier, which according to the Federal Reserves makes $58,000 a year. To that Hoosier, we can give them $2,000 of their money back. And what do people do when they get money? They put it into the economy, because 78% of your pre-tax income goes into the economy. So we have an opportunity to help people. That's going to grow our economy. But equally importantly, we make Indiana a no income tax state eventually. Because where are people moving today? Tennessee, Texas, Florida, South Dakota, no income tax state. The Tax Foundation in Washington, D.C. says that Indiana's 10th in the country for our overall tax environment. We're not bad. But 7 of the states ahead of us have no sales or income tax. If we get rid of our income tax, that'll be a differentiator for us. It'll help put money in Hoosiers' pockets, but it'll grow our economy. So I'm not talking about cutting services. We take our $44.5 billion budget that we passed in 2023, and moving forward, we look at capping how much we allow it to grow. Maybe it's the rate of inflation. Maybe it's the cost of living. That's something we will work out with the General Assembly. But let's limit how much we allow it to grow. And then when we have those excess surpluses and revenues, let's direct them towards eliminating the state income tax. Kentucky's doing that. They've got that very plan in place right now. So our neighbors are going to catch up with us if we aren't careful. Along with that, because I can't do this. This is the General Assembly has the authority to do this. But I am letting them know what my priorities are, and I will take a lead in that. But while we're doing that, then we're going to modernize state government. We're going to have outside independent audits. We're going to realize more efficiencies and more cost savings, and then we'll reprioritize our spending. So we're not looking at cutting services.
But when we talk about money in the state of Indiana, you cannot, and certainly the income tax conversation has been a conversation. If you want to talk about things that anger Hoosiers, it's property taxes. And what has happened this year and how people take a look at what they've had to spend. I thought property taxes were capped. What is happening here? This is madness for sure. This has been madness in what has happened with property taxes. And it doesn't matter where you are in Indiana, this is the conversation. If you were describing it to somebody, what happened and what is your plan to address it?
Well, first of all, as a state representative, I voted for the largest property tax cut in our state's history. I voted to cut corporate income tax. I voted to eliminate the inventory tax, or not the inventory tax, but the inheritance tax. So I have that record of being in favor of cutting taxes, and certainly am open to that discussion. But the income tax, eliminating that, not just puts money into the pockets of working Hoosiers, men and women who are struggling today, but it makes Indiana eventually a no-income tax state, which then attracts people here. It allows our small businesses to grow and to prosper, but it attracts people to Indiana, helps us grow our population, and have more workers to address that workforce shortage.
But the property tax issue is people who, they own their house and they're paying larger fees for it. They want to know where that property tax relief is. And then there's a conversation about people who are retirees or fixed income or veterans. Are we, is Indiana a place that's going to say to them, you know what, you've paid your property taxes, you're good, you're fine? How do we deal with the property tax issue that every Hoosier who's a landowner in the state has dealt with?
Well, we work with the General Assembly, and as I said, I'm open to those conversations, because at the end of the day, it's the General Assembly that makes those decisions. And so certainly open to those conversations and have a track record of cutting property taxes. But I want to have that discussion on the income tax also, because I think that's a differentiator.
Um, the role of government has had a series of conversations in this race, and I think nowhere greater than the conversation about LEAP and what has taken place in Lebanon, and the idea that we need to supercharge the Hoosier economy. We need to create these great places of business growth and opportunity. So land is taken and water is taken, and we say, ta-da, look at this. This is great. Are you a LEAP supporter?
Of course, I'm in favor of economic development, but I would have a different approach to economic development. And some of that comes from being in local government, being a former county commissioner. I'm from Evansville, and so we always felt that disconnect from the capital. The only time we ever felt like we heard from the state was if we were in trouble or we did something wrong. And so I believe that what we have seen in economic development here in Indiana over the last 20, 25 years is a very top-down, state-driven, paternalistic attitude towards economic development, where the state knows best. And I believe that we have to have a strong state economic development initiative, but we also need to empower our local and regional economic development organizations so we can have a true partnership. There also has to be more transparency and more collaboration. There needs to be more transparency with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. I mean, I hear legislators comment to me, they don't even know what goes on. And so that understanding there has to be confidentiality, but there also has to be more transparency and there has to be more collaboration. In talking to commissioners in Tippecanoe and Boone County, they never had that collaboration. They didn't have the information. And so what happens? They're the ones on the front line with their constituents, with their taxpayers, getting bombarded with, well, what about this? What are you doing? How come, what about this question, that question? And that isn't for good economic development. So we have to have more of a partnership. And then we have to have a plan for it, a plan that is public that people can buy into. We have moved forward on LEAP without a statewide water plan. I mean, how can you have a project that is going to require so much water and not have a statewide water plan on where our assets are and how we're going to access them and when they're going to be available? And so it's almost like we put the horse before the cart with the LEAP district.
Is LEAP a model that Indiana should be looking at? If you want to argue cart before the horse, in terms of LEAP and how water we learned was going to be brought in from Lafayette, and nobody knew that this was going to be the case, and a lot of people with a fair amount of anger on that. But there will be people who will tell you that this is how you get mass investment from Louis. It's how you get big investment from these corporations. Is this methodology of the state trying to direct large-scale growth one that a Crouch administration would go forward on, even if there was transparency and collaboration?
It would be one that would have to have buy-in and have collaboration with the locals. I truly believe that. We have to direct more. As governor, I would direct more support and would empower our local economic and regional economic development organizations so they can be true partnerships. Otherwise, we're in danger of leaving parts of Indiana behind because the state, picks and wins, picks the winners and the losers. And if you don't have that kind of collaboration and that working together, someone's going to be left behind. And no part of Indiana can be left behind. I travel this state, and I'll tell you what, people want opportunity. People want to know that they have the ability to be able to earn a living and have a higher quality of life. And quite honestly, I've talked about it many, many times. We have done a pretty good job economically. Indiana's number one in the Midwest. We're sixth in the nation for our business environment. But the next chapter is quality of life. And so quality of life becomes as important to companies as the economic incentives and the tax incentives.
What creates quality?
I mean, quality of life means different things to different people, right? I mean, it can be the destinations you visit. It can be the amenities you enjoy. It's about our education, how our children and grandchildren are educated. It's about how safe we feel in our communities. It's about how healthy we are and those kinds of amenities that promote our health. But it's also about our mental health, and how well we are in terms of being mentally well and being physically well. It's about all of those things. And so that is what people are looking for. It used to be that, people followed business, but today business is following people. And people want to live where they have that quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that becomes as important in these discussions of economic development as just creating the jobs. The other thing is, Governor, I would put more of a focus on our small businesses here in Indiana. 75% of jobs created here in our state are from small businesses. And so let's look at how we can support them also through our local and regional economic development organizations, so that they can turn around and keep creating the jobs that stay with us. We focus on the big companies, we focus on those big jobs, those big, large amount of jobs that we're bringing into the state. But by and large, the bulk of the jobs are coming from the small mom and pop operations and the small businesses here in Indiana.
I'm a believer in quality of life, and I'm a believer that people don't live to work, they work to live. And I think that's more true than not. And part of keeping people in the state of Indiana is not so much the idea that, hey, here's a great job. It's now here are all the things you can do after you've worked that great job. Here's how you can spend your weekend. Here's where the show is, and these kinds of things. But there's also a question of those great jobs. We hear a lot about tech. We heard Governor Holcomb say that coding should be part of high school requirements. That it was in the State of the State address. Is in growing a job market, is it about a specific market that Hoosiers should corner, that the state of Indiana should corner, or is it about tiers of jobs and recognition that we can be almost all things to all Hoosiers?
Well, I think we have to be focused on the jobs of the future. I mean, that's where we're going to need to have workers. If we want to attract those quality jobs of the future, we need to be focused on how do we prepare our children and our adults for those jobs, making sure that they have the skills. And the jobs of the future are, advanced manufacturing, ag bioscience, cybersecurity, defense, healthcare, orthopedics, life sciences. So there has to be a concerted effort to be able to focus on attracting those jobs, but at the same time, skilling up and making sure our young people are prepared to fill those jobs as we're attracting them. So I think it has to happen at the same time. You can't do one without the other. You can't attract the jobs if you don't have the workforce. You can't have the workforce if you don't have the jobs. And so it has to happen in tandem, where we have to be focused on the jobs of the future, but then let's look at how do we prepare our children and how do we get them educated for those jobs of the future, making sure that they either go to college and then once they graduate, they stay here. So let's look at, more favorable tuition for those kind of students that will sign contracts with employers upon graduation. Let's look at having more apprenticeships in high school for those students that want to go on into a trade or into a skill, because we need them also, to be able to build the houses that will house the workers, to be able to put in place the infrastructure that will support that kind of an economy. And so we have to look at doing it all at the same time.
So this brings about education, as you've mentioned. Is education a public good, or is education a consumable product?
Education's a great equalizer. It's how we give everyone an opportunity in life. I believe in equality and opportunity. I don't believe in equality of outcome. We have to work and strive towards giving everyone equal opportunity. That's what education does, is that it gives every child that opportunity to be able to be successful in life. It's why I'm a proponent of early childhood education, because I think that is how you start to prepare those children for that success in life. I think it's why it was positive that the General Assembly took the step to be able to focus on how do we identify the children that are struggling with reading in second grade and get them the help so that they can pass that I Read 3, and be able to move on with their peers and be prepared to be able to read throughout the rest of their life and get jobs. So education to me is the great equalizer.
Does it come from government, or does it come from, can parents make the call?
Parents have to have the choice. And I believe that Indiana is a state where we do support choices by parents. We have vouchers, we have charter schools, we have homeschooling, we, have all of those public schools. And so we can't leave any of those behind. We have to be focused on all of them. That we have to understand that every child may need something different. And we can't have a one-size-fits-all, but we also have to respect and understand that 90% of our children go to traditional public schools. So we have to be focused on that also, and so we need to be supportive of parents' ability and parents' opportunities to make those choices. They have to be able to make the choices. And some of that means we have to perhaps do a better job of educating parents as to what choices are available to them. I'm not sure that parents always understand that there are all these options out there when it comes to their children. So yes, I believe very much that we have to support choice, but we also have to be sure that we are giving every child that opportunity by having early childhood education. I was the author of the early childhood education pilot program in Indiana back in 2013, a co-author of that. And I believe that we need to be focused on that also. It's why I'm proposing that we totally restructure education and workforce training in Indiana.
What does restructuring education look like?
Taking the 5 agencies. We have early childhood education that's housed in Family and Social Services Administration, FSSA, okay? Then we have K through 12, right? Standalone agency. We have higher education, a standalone agency. We have workforce training, which is housed in Department of Workforce Development. And then we have IDC that has a little bit of economic development. And so what I would do is pull out early childhood education, take K through 12 higher education, pull workforce development, workforce training out from DWD, and take a little bit of economic development. Now create one agency where everyone is on the same software system. Everyone is operating together to make sure that our children are prepared for those jobs of the future, to make sure that they're able to take advantage of that equal opportunity and prepared for that next step in life. We have to be bold. We haven't come this far to have just come this far. And unlike my opponents, I'm the only one that's talking about the bold ideas, being able to eliminate the income tax, being able to, modernize state government and downsize it and realize efficiencies and cost savings, and being able to put them into new and different programs, being able to focus on mental illness and addiction. We have to be bold if we're going to move forward into the future.
Often when in an election like this, you'll get asked, or the question comes up about a focus area. The first 100 days, usually here with the presidency, the first 100 days of a Crouch administration. What is it that Hoosiers will be able to tangibly see and feel?
Well, the first 100 days are going to be part of the budget session. So we will be focused on eliminating the income tax. We'll be focused on modernizing government. Top priority is dealing with those that are struggling with mental illness and addiction. Hoosiers can see some initiatives, some bold initiatives in those areas. And then, of course, being able to look at our drug problem and being able to make sure that we are making sure that Indiana is doing everything it can to be able to fight the fentanyl dealers, keep that down, and being able to make sure that our children are protected, from the drugs that are coming across the border and into our state, because every state's a border state today. So that's the kind of action they're going to see from me. They're going to see it in legislative action, and they'll see it with executive orders.
Let's talk about the knock on you.
The knock on me? Somebody knocking me?
I don't think I'm going to tell you anything right now that you are going to be surprised to hear. The knock on Suzanne Crouch. COVID comes, the state locks down, you are there right next to Governor Eric Holcomb, and you say nothing. That's the knock on Suzanne Crouch.
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond to that?
We can look back and say, I should have done, we should have done, things should have been done differently. We don't have the opportunity to go back and change what is. We were lied to by Fauci and the federal government. And so I learned from the mistakes of our top executives, and I will tell you this, that the healthcare experts will be on tap in the future when I'm governor, but they're not going to be on top. And if we have another instance like that, and I am governor, I will promise you this, there will be no lockdowns, there'll be no masks, there'll be no mandates because of what it has done to us and to our children. We have seen a 20% increase in anxiety and depression among the population, but we've seen a 60% increase among young people. In the past 6 months, 1 out of 7 high school boys and 1 out of 4 high school girls have contemplated suicide. Second leading cause of death among young people. And so much of that is because of COVID. So we can't do that again. I have learned, and as governor, we aren't going to make that mistake again. We will move forward and we will not have masks or mandates or lockdowns. I can't change what is.
But your words, it was a mistake. Has that conversation ever come up? Has that ever conversation? Because the idea that you can't go back, I think people can accept.
Mm-hmm.
But very often that's seen as a shirking of a responsibility to say, I allowed that to happen, or I made that mistake in being silent when it was happening. And so it is rather pointed and not normally my style here. When you talk about mistakes of top executives, do you put yourself in that group?
I can't go back and change what is. I did nothing, and I will say this, that at the time, I did everything that I thought was right. But at the time, we were lied to by Fauci and the federal government. And we can look back now and say, yeah, that is what happened. I can't change what is, Tony. All I can do is move forward. And I am saying that as governor, we will not have mask mandates or lockdowns because what it has done to each and every one of us, including our children, I can't go back and change what is. And so, that is where we are. It was during COVID when I saw what was happening, how we were all behaving, that's when I really started talking to people in the mental health space, in the addiction space. And I've shared many times, for me, my interest in those that struggle with mental illness and addiction is very personal. My mother struggled with depression. My older brother, Larry, was an alcoholic. And my younger sister, Nancy, died in her early 20s by suicide. And then our daughter struggles with mental illness and is 16 years sober. So, it was during COVID when I saw what was happening is when I started focusing on learning more about how do we deal with people. Because while I've had personal experiences, I'm not an expert. I'm not a professional. And so talking to people all over Indiana during that period of time, learning about what we can do and what people are struggling with and how we need to have more accessibility and we need to have more affordability. There needs to be more transparency. We need to have more healthcare professionals. We need to be sure that people have what they need. And it's why I spoke out and testified on behalf of Senate Enrolled Act 1, during the 23 budget session, is to be able to be a voice for those that are struggling, because that Senate Enrolled Act 1 is what put in place the infrastructure and then ultimately the funding for the 988 suicide hotline. So I can't change what is. All I can do is learn from our experiences and learn at how we can do things better and how we can help people more.
That is Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch. Just one of the interviews we've done here. Those Republican candidates running for governor, they're all there at WIBC.com and only at WIBC.com. Watch them all, and don't forget that the primary is May 7th. I got that right, May 7th.
May 7th.
I figured that all by myself. Be sure to check out the videos. Be sure to share the page, and you'll be hearing these interviews, not only watching the videos, but you'll be hearing them on the radio shows, both Tony Katz in the Morning News and Tony Katz today. Lieutenant Governor, thank you.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.